Hey everybody, it's Kendall from Recording Lounge again, and I'm doing another tutorial about parallel compression. On this tutorial, we're going to talk about using parallel compression with multiple faders or aux tracks or effects tracks to get unique combinations of tones. So let me explain what I've got up here. I've got a normal sort of set of drum mics, no tom mics, but overhead, stereo room, mono overhead, mono room, kick, snare, hat. I've got a shaker track in there too. But basically, all these tracks are going to this drum bus. I've got a little EQ on the kick and snare, just nothing major. But this is what the dry drums sound like. And basically what we're going to do is we sent this drum bus pre-fader, keep that in mind, keep pre-fader to these individual tracks. And on each of these tracks we've got different types of processing. And it's not really anything sacred, it's just kind of obvious. So I've got a crush bus which has Soundtoys Devil-Loc Deluxe, great plugin, really crushed, awesome compressed sound. On the drum smack, I've got the Native Instruments Transient Master, cool plugin, kind of like a transient designer. And then I've got the Glue for adding some really smacky compression. And I've got a drums lo-fi channel, which has Decapitator for some distortion. And then I'm using Pro Q for a little bit of EQ, and I'm also narrowing it a little bit by turning down the side channel. You can see that it says side minus 6.43 dB. So yeah, whatever. So we'll just pull down the side so it's a little narrower. Now we have a drums hi-fi channel that is just EQ, real hyped, real sort of hyped big bottom, and not huge bottom, but added some bottom, added some top, lots of top end, and widened it a little bit, pulled down the center by 2 dB in the middle. And then we have a drums fat channel, which has the Soft Tube Native Instruments Enhanced EQ, where we're adding a crap load of bottom and then pulling out quite a bit of top. So I'll let you hear what each of these sound like. Here is the crush. Okay, here's the smack. Might back this down a little bit, it's a little too strong. Again, my goal with these is not necessarily to be subtle, okay? It's sort of meant to be a little bit aggressive because it doesn't have to be. I mean, you can blend in however much you want, but this allows me to get a really obvious smack and then blend it in with a totally dry drum kit. Now we have drums lo-fi, which has Decapitator. It's narrow and dirty. We got drums hi-fi, which is like overly scooped, overly bright. It's got some low mids cut, and it's a little bit widened from the mid-side EQ. Then we have drums fat. Real fat, right? So now what's cool is I can take my drum bus, my dry drum bus, and without having to do a whole lot of anything, I mean, I added a little EQ on the kick and snare like I showed you, little thing here, added some top end on the kick. The kick seemed really dull, and actually real fat, a little too fat overall, so I pulled out some of this weird low-mid resonance. Anyway, so a little EQ on kick and snare, but everything else is empty completely. Now I can get cool tones by just adjusting the balance of the drum faders and by playing with these blended in with my dry drum bus. So just watch and listen and see what kind of happens when I do this. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. Here we go. Adding a little bit of that smack bus to get a little more attack. feels a little thin, so I'm going to add some of my fat bus. I'm going to pull down my room mics a little bit. And add some crush. Maybe some lo-fi. And maybe a little hi-fi. So I know that it's you're being a little bit biased by the fact that things are getting louder, but it is cool. It is an interesting way to mix because you're not really worried about individual things so much. You're a little bit more just focusing on creative things like crush and smack and lo-fi. You're not sitting there like messing with plugins too much. You're not worried about this crush being too crushed. You know, you're just blending it in with an original. You're not worried about smack being too smacky or drums being too lo-fi. You're just blending it in. Okay, it's kind of like you go that extra mile on purpose and then you just blend it in. And that's a really interesting way to mix. It's a really interesting way to view compression. And so now we have our process drums that sound like this. And our dry drums, before we did any processing, sounded like this. Tried to bump the level up here to level match. Pretty cool, right? So this type of technique has been used on all kinds of things, from bass, vocals, very popular with vocals, to have, say, like your clean, dry vocal sound, and then you have like a crushed vocal for some aggression. You have like maybe a really pretty airy vocal that's got some like affix widening on it, something like that. You know, maybe you have like a really mid-range heavy vocal that's kind of just thick and goopy, you know, something like that. You can really do any combination of this to get really interesting tones on vocals or drums or bass. It can be really cool sometimes on acoustic guitar. It can be cool on piano. Piano is a tricky one because piano can actually stand up quite a bit to heavy compression in a rock song. So it's nice to be able to blend that in to have a normal, like dry, simple piano sound, but then blend in, say, like a really crushed piano, and then maybe a really attacky piano, and then maybe a really bright, crisp, you know, thin sounding piano, and balance those effects and auxes with the original so that you get sort of this super piano sound. It can be a really interesting way to get sounds rather than just piling on inserts. And you can get sounds differently than you could with your standard wet-dry mix because, as you can tell, you know, I can add extra plugins. I can really push them to the max. I don't have to worry about anything being drastically, you know, overly this, overly that, because I'm just bringing up the level. I will say, though, the only way that this really works is if you have plug-in delay compensation. Most DAWs have it these days, if I'm not mistaken, but sometimes the plugins don't. You know, if you've got some freebies from smaller manufacturers or something that don't play nice with that, then, and it just kind of depends. I've had that experience, not in a long while, but I know I've had it before. So you don't want any latency issues or phasing issues between these channels. So depending on your DAW, if you have issues with that, you'll hear it immediately. You know, you'll hear this weird phasing, sort of like hollow, swishy sound when it comes to bringing up that second fader. If you're not sure about it, you know, well, no, I take that back. You should be able to hear it. It's a pretty obvious, ugly sound. So just, if you really aren't sure, just take a processor, whatever it is, and turn it, keep the plugin on, but then maybe turn the amount to 0 or something like that, and that would allow you to, the delay would still be happening, so you'd be able to hear if there were phasing issues, but it wouldn't be affected by that process. So anyway, I hope this has given you some things to think about, and thanks for watching. Check out the podcast, Recording Lounge Podcast, on iTunes or your favorite other podcast app or website, and send me an email if you have any questions, recordingloungepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks.